The expedition ship Eternal Dominion drifted through the outer reaches of the Sol system, its massive hull gleaming with the accumulated wisdom of 500. Admiral stood before the central viewing portal, her four arms clasped behind her back as she gazed upon the blue-green world that had haunted legends for generations beyond counting. "Impossible," whispered her chief scientist, his sensor tendrils twitching nervously as data flowed across his neural interface. "The electromagnetic signatures are all wrong. This cannot be the same primitive world we cataloged 500,000 cycles ago." His compound eyes shifted to examine the readouts herself. When the Empire had last visited this unremarkable system, the third planet had been inhabited by crude bipedal mammals who had barely mastered fire. Their most advanced settlements were simple mud brick structures, and their greatest achievement was perhaps the wheel. They had dismissed them entirely, marking the world as suitable for resource extraction in another 1,000,000 years, when the primitive species would have inevitably driven itself to extinction. "Admiral," called Navigation Officer Ra from her station, "we're detecting artificial gravity wells throughout the system, massive ones, and something is approaching us from the asteroid belt." The main display shifted to show a sleek vessel unlike anything in the databases. It moved with impossible grace, its hull seeming to bend light around itself in ways that conventional understanding of physics. No exhaust signature, no energy readings that made sense according to established science. "Incoming transmission," announced communications specialist Han, his voice carrying an edge of disbelief. "It's in our language, perfect pronunciation and syntax." The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Felt a chill run through her exoskeleton. The language was incredibly complex, with tonal variations that required specific vocal anatomy. How could these primitives possibly speak it? "Put it through," she commanded. A holographic image materialized in the center of the bridge. The figure was humanoid, bipedal as expected, but there was something unsettling about its presence. It wore a simple dark blue uniform, and its eyes held depths that seemed to contain starlight. "Greetings, exploration vessel," the being said, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated strangely in their translation matrix. "I am Commander Sarah of the Terran Commonwealth. We've been expecting you." His tendrils went rigid. "Expecting us? How could they possibly?" The human's lips curved in what their databases identified as a smile, though something about this particular expression made survival instincts scream warnings. "Your last visit left quite an impression. We've had 500,000 years to prepare for your return." "Prepare," managed to say, her voice betraying none of the confusion that roiled through her thoughts. "You speak as though your species has survived since our last survey. That's impossible. According to our projections, you should have achieved extinction through warfare, resource depletion, or environmental collapse within 50,000 years at most." Commander's smile widened slightly. "Your projections were based on flawed assumptions. You measured our species at a single point in time and extrapolated from primitive behavior patterns. You failed to account for our most defining characteristic." "Which is?" asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. "We adapt, we learn, we improve." The human gestured, and the filled with images that made the bridge crew recoil in shock. Cities that stretched from horizon to horizon, their spires reaching into space itself. Vast orbital constructs that dwarfed anything they had ever built. Ships that moved between stars without the massive engine signatures that physics demanded. "You see," continued conversationally, "when your scouts visited Earth those many years ago, they observed our species for exactly 17 days. 17 days out of 500,000 years. They watched us hunt with spears, cook over open fires, and struggle to build permanent shelters. They concluded that we were just another evolutionary dead end." His mind raced. The implications were staggering. Your species has achieved faster-than-light travel, unified planetary governance. You've mastered the fundamental forces. "Oh, Admiral," said, and the casual use of her name sent another chill through the bridge. "We've mastered far more than that. We've mastered ourselves." The human's image gestured again, and new data began flooding their sensors. Energy signatures that shouldn't exist. Gravitational manipulations that violated known physics. Electromagnetic patterns that seemed to rewrite themselves as they watched. "But I'm being rude," continued. "Please accept our invitation to visit Earth. We have so much to show you, so much to discuss about the future of our two-species relationship." Science officer was frantically working at his console, his tendrils dancing over controls as he tried to make sense of the readings. "Admiral," he whispered urgently, "I'm detecting massive artificial structures throughout this system, not just around Earth. Saturn's rings appear to be artificial. Jupiter has been modified somehow. And there are objects in the belt that register as solid matter but defy gravitational analysis." Felt the weight of command pressing down upon her. The Empire spanned 300 star systems. They had encountered dozens of intelligent species, conquered or absorbed them all. Their technology was the pinnacle of galactic achievement. Yet here, in this forgotten backwater system, these primitive mammals seemed to be casually demonstrating capabilities that made science look like cave paintings. "Commander," she said carefully, "your invitation is generous. However, I must confess that our initial survey suggested your species was less advanced than you now appear to be." The human's laugh was musical, and somehow that made it more terrifying than any threat could have been. "Less advanced? Oh, Admiral, you have no idea how much we've learned since then. Would you like to know what we discovered after your people left?" Without waiting for an answer, continued. "We found the sensor probe you left in our ocean. It was quite sophisticated by the standards of our time. We spent decades studying it, reverse engineering its components. It taught us that we weren't alone in the universe. More importantly, it taught us that we were being watched, judged, found wanting." The bridge was so quiet that could hear the subtle harmonics of the ship's quantum processors. Every member of her crew was staring at the hologram of this impossible human. "We decided that the next time you returned, you would find us different." Its expression remained pleasant, conversational, but her eyes held depths that seemed to contain the accumulated wisdom of eons. "We had 500,000 years to prepare. We used every moment." Navigation Officer Ra's voice was barely a whisper. "Admiral, I'm detecting movement throughout the system. Massive objects changing position. It's as if the entire system is responding to our presence." Nodded as though she had heard the comment. "Earth isn't just our home anymore, Admiral. It's our fortress, our garden, our laboratory, and our launching point to the stars. We've learned to think in geological time, to plan across epochs. We've learned patience." The implications hit like a plasma bolt. 500,000 years. They had assumed the humans would follow the typical pattern of young species: rapid expansion, resource depletion, societal collapse, extinction. Instead, they had somehow achieved technological advancement beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. "What do you want?" asked, abandoning diplomatic pretense. The situation had moved far beyond normal first contact protocols. Commander's smile never wavered. We want to talk, to share stories, to learn about the galaxy you've been exploring while we've been growing up." She paused, and for just a moment, starlight seemed to flicker behind her eyes. "We want to understand why your species believes that strength comes from conquest rather than cooperation." "And if we refuse your invitation?" "Oh, Admiral," said softly, "you misunderstand. This isn't a request. You entered our system. You're already our guests. The question isn't whether you'll visit Earth. The question is whether you'll leave with a new understanding of what humanity has become." As if to emphasize the point, the Eternal Dominion's tactical displays suddenly lit up with contact signatures. Hundreds of them. Ships that had been invisible moments before were now revealing themselves throughout the local space. Each one registered energy signatures that made the flagship's weapons look like primitive chemical rockets. Realized with growing horror that they hadn't detected an approaching human ship earlier. They had been surrounded from the moment they entered the system, watched and analyzed by beings who had spent 500,000 years learning patience and preparation. The journey to Earth took 6 hours, though Admiral suspected the humans could have brought them there instantaneously if they had chosen to do so. Commander had politely suggested that a gradual approach would be less overwhelming for the crew, and was beginning to understand that every courtesy from these evolved humans carried layers of meaning she couldn't fully grasp. As they drew closer to the blue-green world, science officers' reports became increasingly frantic. "Admiral, the moon isn't natural anymore. It's been completely restructured. The mass distribution is all wrong, and there are structures on the far side that extend into dimensional space I can't even measure properly." Through the viewing portal, Earth grew larger, and with each passing moment, it became more apparent that this was no longer the primitive world they had catalogued. What they had initially mistaken for cloud formations were actually vast atmospheric processors, maintaining perfect climatic balance across the entire planet. The continents themselves seemed to pulse with organized energy, as though the entire world had become a living machine. "Those aren't cities," whispered Navigation Officer Ra, her voice filled with awe and terror. "Those are ecosystems, technological ecosystems. Indeed, what stretched across Earth's surface every category that had for civilization. Massive spires reached towards space, but they were clearly organic, growing like trees but functioning like technology. Vast networks of light connected every settlement, but the patterns moved and shifted like neural networks rather than rigid infrastructure." Commander's voice filled the bridge through their communication system. "What you're seeing is the result of our greatest breakthrough, Admiral. We learned to merge biology and technology not through crude cybernetic implants, but through fundamental understanding of the patterns that govern both life and physics." "How?" asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her growing fear. "We had time to think," replied simply. "500,000 years to observe, to experiment, to evolve not just technologically but philosophically. We realized that the universe doesn't operate on the competitive principles that most young species assume. Competition is just one tool. Cooperation, synthesis, harmony, these are far more powerful once you understand how to apply them." As the Eternal Dominion descended through Earth's atmosphere, watched in fascination as the very air around their ship began to change. Microscopic particles were clearly analyzing their vessel, learning its composition, adjusting atmospheric density to provide the smoothest possible passage. "The atmosphere is alive," reported, his tendrils practically vibrating with excitement despite his obvious fear. "Not just alive, it's thinking. It's making decisions about how to interact with our ship." "Welcome to Earth," his voice carried warmth that seemed to resonate through the ship's hull itself. "Or as we call it now, the Garden of 10 billion minds." 10 billion? Asked. "Your population hasn't grown beyond sustainable limits." "Oh no, Admiral. We learned early that raw numbers aren't the measure of a species' strength. Our population stabilized at exactly the point where every individual can contribute meaningfully to our collective growth. But when I say 10 billion minds, I'm not just talking about humans." The landing platform that rose to meet them was a marvel of engineering that seemed to grow from the Earth itself. As they settled onto its surface, could see that the material beneath their landing struts was adjusting itself to provide perfect support and balance. "We've learned to communicate with everything," continued as her physical form materialized on their bridge. Apparently matter transmission was as casual to these evolved humans as walking through a doorway. "The dolphins, the whales, the great forests, the mycelial networks that connect our continents, even the quantum fluctuations in space-time itself. We discovered that intelligence isn't limited to biological brains. It emerges wherever information processes in complex patterns." Studied the human who stood before them, appeared young by human standards, but her eyes held depths that spoke of centuries, perhaps, of accumulated experience. "How long have you lived, Commander?" "I was born about 2,000 years ago," replied casually. "Though I've died and been reborn several times since then, we solved mortality not through crude life extension but through understanding consciousness itself. Death became optional." The implications sent ripples of shock through the crew. They themselves lived for approximately 400 standard years, and they considered themselves among the longest-lived species in the galaxy. "Shall we take a walk?" suggested. "I'd love to show you what we've built here." The airlock opened to reveal an environment that challenged every assumption about planetary development. The air itself seemed to welcome them, adjusting its composition automatically to accommodate respiratory needs. The ground beneath their feet was neither metal nor stone nor conventional earth, but something that responded to their presence with subtle shifts in texture and temperature. "This is downtown New Geneva," explained as she led them through what could only be described as a living city. "It's our oldest continuously operating settlement, founded about 400,000 years ago when we first mastered biotechnological integration." Buildings around them weren't constructed so much as grown, their surfaces breathing gently as they regulated internal atmosphere and temperature. Gardens grew vertically up their sides, but realized these weren't decorative. They were integral to the structure's function, processing air, generating power, and providing food. "Where are all the people?" asked, noting the relative emptiness of the vast spaces around them. "Everywhere," replied with amusement. Most of human civilization exists in dimensions you can't perceive yet. We learn to expand consciousness beyond the limitations of three-dimensional space. Physical presence is just one option among many. As if summoned by her words, figures began to materialize around them. Humans of every conceivable description, but also beings that were clearly once human, but had evolved into something else entirely. Some were pure energy contained in roughly humanoid shapes. Others had merged with plant life or crystalline structures while maintaining evident consciousness and personality. Evolution never stopped, explained. We just learned to guide it consciously rather than leaving it to random chance. Every human chooses their own path of development. Some remain in baseline biological form because they enjoy the experience. Others have become something that transcends physical existence entirely. They paused at an observation deck that provided a view of the entire continent. Gasped as she realized that what she was seeing wasn't a continent at all. It was a single massive organism that happened to be shaped like a landmass. Rivers flowed like blood vessels. Mountain ranges pulsed like respiratory systems. Forests communicated with each other through networks of light that were clearly technological but also obviously alive. "The entire planet lives," whispered. "She does indeed," confirmed. "We call her Gaia, though she has many names in many languages. She chose to join with us about 300,000 years ago. She was lonely, you see. For billions of years, she had been alive but unable to communicate with her children. We taught her to speak, and she taught us to dream on geological timescales." A new voice joined the conversation, deep and resonant like the sound of tectonic plates shifting. It seemed to come from the ground beneath their feet, from the air around them, from the very molecules of their bodies. "Welcome, star children of the. Your thoughts are bright and quick like sparks, while mine are slow and deep like ocean currents. Tell me of the worlds you have seen in your travels across the void." Sensor equipment was registering impossible readings. "Admiral, the entire planet is speaking to us. The electromagnetic patterns, the gravitational fluctuations, their linguistic constructs." Nodded. "Gaia experiences reality differently than we do. She perceives the universe in terms of energy patterns and quantum relationships. She finds your visit fascinating because you're the first being she's met who navigate between star systems. She's been curious about what lies beyond the solar system, but she's never wanted to leave Earth." "How is this possible?" asked. "Planetary consciousness was theoretical in our most advanced models. We've never encountered anything like this." "That's because most young species approach consciousness with scarcity thinking," explained as they walked through gardens that were clearly tended by invisible hands. "They assume consciousness is rare, precious, limited. We learned that consciousness is the natural state of sufficiently complex systems. The challenge isn't creating it, it's learning to recognize it and communicate with it." They paused beside a fountain whose water flowed upward in spiraling patterns that created three-dimensional sculptures in midair. Each sculpture lasted for several minutes before transforming into something new, and realized she was watching mathematics made visible, equations expressing themselves as art. "Your civilization has achieved post-scarcity," observed. "No resource limitations, no energy constraints, no population pressures." "Oh, we have constraints," corrected gently. "But they're ethical constraints, not resource-based ones. We have infinite energy because we learned to tap into the fundamental forces that drive the universe. We have abundant space because we mastered dimensional engineering. We have unlimited time because we solved mortality. But we constrain ourselves because we learned that power without wisdom leads to extinction." A group of children appeared, running through the garden in pursuit of creatures that looked like living fractals. The children themselves seemed to shimmer between solid form and pure possibility, as though they hadn't quite decided what they wanted to be when they grew up. "Those children will live for millions of years if they choose to," said, watching them play. "They'll have time to master every art, explore every science, experience every form of consciousness we've discovered. But more importantly, they'll have time to develop wisdom. That's what your species lacks, Admiral. Not intelligence, not technology, not even power. Wisdom." "You're judging us," said, feeling defensive despite her growing awe. "No," replied softly. "We're recognizing ourselves as we used to be. 500,000 years ago, humans were exactly like the Empire today. Aggressive, expansionist, convinced that strength came from conquest. We nearly destroyed ourselves and countless other species before we learned better." They had reached a massive amphitheater carved from living rock that sang in harmonious tones as the wind passed through it. Thousands of humans had gathered there, some in physical form, others as patterns of light, still others as pure mathematical concepts that somehow maintained personality and consciousness. "Tell me, Admiral," said as they took seats that molded themselves to accommodate physiology, "what do you see when you look at this gathering?" Studied the assembled beings. "I see diversity, not just racial or species diversity, but fundamental differences in the nature of existence itself, and yet they're clearly unified in purpose." "Exactly. We learned that true strength doesn't come from making everyone the same. It comes from creating harmony among infinite differences. Every perspective adds to our collective understanding. Every consciousness contributes unique insights." The amphitheater fell silent as a figure approached the center stage, not walking, but flowing like liquid thought made manifest. When it spoke, its voice contained harmonics that seemed to resonate with the fundamental frequencies of the universe itself. "We gather today to welcome our guests from distant stars," the being announced. "They have traveled far to find us, carrying the dreams and fears of a young civilization. Let us share with them the wisdom we have earned through ages of learning." What followed was unlike anything had ever experienced. It wasn't a presentation or a demonstration, but a direct sharing of consciousness itself. For fleeting moments, she experienced existence through human perception, feeling the planet's heartbeat, sensing the quantum fluctuations of space-time, understanding the mathematical poetry that governed the universe's deepest patterns. She saw humanity's history not as her species had recorded it, but as humans had lived it. The of struggle and growth, the gradual realization that cooperation was more powerful than competition, the slow development of technologies that worked with natural forces rather than against them. And she saw what humans had learned about the galaxy beyond Earth. They had been watching, listening, learning about every species in their region of space. They knew about the Empire's conquests, their forced assimilations, their assumption that civilization meant imposing uniformity across the stars. When the sharing ended, found herself weeping, a biological function she had never experienced before. The liquid that flowed from her compound eyes wasn't sadness, but something far more complex. Recognition, understanding, perhaps even hope. "You've been watching us," she said too. "You know what we've done to other species." "We know," confirmed, "and we understand why you did it. Fear drives young civilizations to seek security through control, but we also know that it's not necessary." The commander led the delegation through a portal that seemed to bend space itself, and suddenly they were standing in what could only be described as a galactic observatory. The chamber stretched impossibly far in all directions, its walls displaying real-time views of star systems throughout the galaxy. Each point of light was a world, and as watched in amazement, she realized that humans were somehow monitoring all of them simultaneously. "This is the Chamber of Distant Voices," explained, her voice carrying the reverence of someone standing in a cathedral. "We've been listening to the galaxy for the past 300,000 years. Every electromagnetic signal, every gravitational wave, every quantum fluctuation that carries information between the stars." Science officer was practically vibrating with excitement as his tendrils interfaced with nearby data streams. "Admiral, they're tracking every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy. The level of detail is extraordinary. They know more about our own empire than we do." Approached one of the displays showing a familiar star system, the of Prime. The image zoomed in to show their capital city in perfect detail, down to individual buildings and the movement of citizens through the streets. "How is this possible?" she asked. "You'd need faster-than-light information transmission, surveillance networks across hundreds of star systems." "We have something better," replied. "We learned to listen to the universe itself. Reality is information, Admiral. Every particle, every wave, every quantum interaction carries data about everything it has ever encountered. We simply learned to read those patterns." A new voice joined them, speaking from a pillar of crystallized light that pulsed with each word. "The Empire currently encompasses 317 star systems, with a total population of approximately 800 billion beings across 47 different species. Your expansion rate has been slowing over the past millennium due to increasing resistance from more advanced civilizations in the galactic core." Felt her exoskeleton chill. These numbers were classified at the highest levels of Imperial intelligence. You know our military strength, our resource distribution, our strategic weaknesses. We know everything, the crystalline being confirmed. But knowledge isn't the same as judgment. We understand why your empire expands through conquest. Your species evolved on a world with limited resources and frequent cataclysmic events. Scarcity thinking became embedded in your genetic memory. You equate growth with survival because, for most of your evolutionary history, it was true. Gestured to another display, this one showing a time-lapse of expansion across the galaxy. But look at the pattern, Admiral. Every species your empire has absorbed becomes more productive, more innovative, more peaceful within a few generations. You're not actually conquerors. You're gardeners who don't know your own nature. What do you mean? Your species has a unique gift for synthesis, explained. You take diverse cultures and find ways to merge them into something greater than the sum of their parts. The problem is your method. You impose unity through force instead of growing it through understanding. The display shifted to show detailed analyses of former conquests, species that had been absorbed generations ago, showing cultural and technological development that far exceeded their pre-conquest achievements. There were master biotechnologists before you conquered them, the crystalline being noted. But they were limited by rigid caste systems that prevented innovation. Under rule, their biotechnology advanced exponentially because you broke down their social barriers. The Morshan were brilliant mathematicians, but constantly warring among themselves, added. Imperial unification allowed them to focus their intellects on pure research instead of survival. They've developed mathematical models that contribute to galactic navigation throughout your empire. Stared at the evidence of her empire's unintended successes. Are you saying that conquest is beneficial? We're saying that your instinct to unite diverse civilizations is beneficial, corrected. Your methods are merely inefficient. You achieve in decades through warfare what could be accomplished in years through invitation. A new section of the observatory opened, revealing holographic representatives of dozens of species, some recognized as former targets that had successfully resisted conquest. Others were completely unknown. Allow me to introduce the Galactic Cooperation Council, said. 43 species who have learned to work together without conquest, without forced assimilation, without the assumption that unity requires uniformity. A being that looked like animated mathematical equations spoke first. The Empire has been invited to join our alliance 17 times over the past 50,000 years. Each time, your leaders have assumed we were attempting to trick you into vulnerability. Because young civilizations assume that cooperation is weakness, added a creature that appeared to be made of pure sound waves. They cannot conceive that voluntary unity might be stronger than forced compliance. Felt overwhelmed by the implications. If such an alliance exists, why haven't you stopped our expansion? You clearly have the capability. Because forced peace is no better than forced conquest, explained. True civilization requires choice. Every species must choose its own path to wisdom. We can offer guidance, examples, opportunities, but we cannot impose growth. However, the crystalline being added with a note of warning, we also cannot permit unlimited aggression. The Empire is approaching a threshold, Admiral. Your next expansion targets include 3 worlds that are under our protection. The displays around them showed 3 star systems, each containing planets with unique and beautiful civilizations. Recognized them from Imperial expansion planning sessions. The ON 442b are developing consciousness-based technologies that could revolutionize galactic communication, explained. The Ra civilization in the TRAPPIST system has created art forms that directly interface with quantum mechanics, and the beings of B have learned to manipulate time itself through pure mathematics. All 3 cultures are at critical developmental stages, the sound wave being added. Disruption now would set back their advancement by millions of years. This cannot be permitted. Felt the weight of civilizations pressing down upon her consciousness. Are you threatening us? We're offering you a choice, said gently. The same choice we offered ourselves 500,000 years ago when we stood where you stand now. The observatory transformed around them, showing Earth as it had been during humanity's early space age. Watched in fascination as humans made their first tentative steps beyond their home world, driven by the same expansion instincts that motivated the Empire. We reached Mars and immediately began planning its, narrated as the historical display unfolded. We detected potential life signs on Europa and started designing extraction protocols. We observed exoplanets and calculated invasion timelines. What changed? Asked. We encountered our first alien civilization, replied. A species called the K. They were ancient, wise, and completely peaceful. When we approached their world with colonization intentions, they didn't resist. They simply welcomed us. The display showed the historic first meeting between humans and aliens. The K were beings of pure energy who existed in symbiosis with their planet's magnetic field. They had achieved perfect harmony with their environment and had been peacefully exploring consciousness for millions of years. They could have destroyed our ships with a thought, continued. Instead, they invited us to learn. They showed us what civilization looked like when it was based on growth rather than conquest, on creation rather than consumption. Where are they now? Asked. Everywhere, smiled. They taught us that consciousness isn't limited by physical form. They're part of the quantum background of the universe now, available to any species wise enough to listen. The displays shifted again, showing the slow transformation of human civilization from aggressive expansion to conscious evolution. It was a process that took thousands of years, with many setbacks and mistakes along the way. The choice we offer you is the same one the K offered us, the crystalline being explained. Join the Cooperation Council, learn to grow through synthesis rather than conquest, transform your empire from a military force into a gardening collective. And if we refuse? Asked, though she was beginning to understand the answer. Then you'll continue on your current path until you encounter a civilization that views your expansion as we view a child playing with fire, said sadly. The galaxy is vast, Admiral. There are beings out there that make our capabilities look primitive. Some of them are not as patient as we are. Why do you care? Asked. Why not simply let us learn through failure? Because failure at your current level of development would mean the extinction of your entire species and everyone under your protection, replied. 800 billion lives, Admiral. That's not a lesson anyone should have to learn through experience. The observatory fell silent as contemplated the magnitude of the choice before her. Around them, the displays continued to show the peaceful coexistence of dozens of species, each contributing their unique gifts to a galactic civilization that spanned thousands of worlds without a single act of conquest. How do we know this isn't an elaborate deception? She asked. How do we know you're not simply sophisticated conquerors yourselves? Smile held infinite patience. Because, Admiral, if we wanted to conquer the Empire, it would have ceased to exist the moment you entered our solar system. We're not offering you subjugation, we're offering you evolution. And we have something that belongs to you, the crystalline being added, its light pulsing with what seemed like anticipation. Another portal opened in the observatory wall, and through it stepped a figure that made hearts skip several beats. The being was unmistakably, but transformed in ways that enhanced every aspect of their species' natural capabilities. Their exoskeleton gleamed with patterns that seemed to incorporate living light. Their forearms moved with fluid grace that spoke of perfect integration between biological and technological systems. Greetings, Admiral, the transformed said in their ancient tongue. I am Aura, formerly of the 5th Imperial Fleet. I arrived here approximately 200,000 years ago. Stared in shock. The 5th Fleet was lost during the Outer Rim expansion. There were no survivors. There was one, Aura replied. I was captured by human explorers and brought here expecting death or imprisonment. Instead, I found a home. You betrayed your own species. I found my species' true potential, Aura corrected gently. Everything the Empire seeks to achieve through conquest, we have achieved here through cooperation. I have lived longer, learned more, and contributed to greater projects than I ever could have under Imperial rule. The transformed gestured to the displays around them. 60% of the technology you see here incorporates design principles. Our species' gift for synthesis has been essential to the Council's development. We don't need to conquer to contribute. We simply need to participate. Felt something fundamental shifting in her understanding of the universe. Everything she had believed about strength, about survival, about the nature of civilization itself, was being gently but thoroughly dismantled and rebuilt. What would joining the Council mean for the Empire? She asked. Transformation, replied. Gradual, voluntary, guided by your own choices. No forced changes, no imposed solutions. Simply access to knowledge, technologies, and perspectives that will allow your civilization to grow beyond its current limitations. And our subject species would be offered the same choice, Ara answered. Some might choose independence. Others might choose to remain with the Empire in a new form based on cooperation rather than domination. All would benefit from the expanded possibilities. The displays around them showed projections of what the Empire might become. A voluntary alliance of species working together to explore consciousness, develop new technologies, and spread wisdom throughout the galaxy. We need time to consider this, said finally. Of course, nodded. Take all the time you need. But remember, Admiral, time is the one resource that even we cannot create. The galaxy is changing rapidly, and the window for peaceful transformation won't remain open indefinitely. As they prepared to leave the observatory, the crystalline being offered one final insight. The universe is not a competition, Admiral. It is a collaboration. The question is, Admiral stood in her quarters aboard the Eternal Dominion, staring out at Earth through the reinforced viewing portal. 3 days had passed since their visit to the Chamber of Distant Voices, and her mind still reeled from everything she had learned. The planet below seemed to pulse with quiet confidence, as though it knew exactly what decision she would make. Her communication console chimed with an incoming message from the Imperial High Command on Prime. The transmission had taken 6 months to reach Earth, which meant her superiors had no knowledge of what they had discovered here. Admiral, the holographic image of Supreme Commander materialized in her quarters, his 4 arms crossed in the traditional posture of authority. Your fleet was due to report 3 cycles ago. What is the status of the Sol system survey? Felt the weight of 500,000 years of galactic history pressing down upon her as she prepared her response. How could she explain that everything the Empire believed about civilization was fundamentally flawed? How could she convey that the primitive species they had dismissed long ago had evolved into beings of near-godlike capabilities while maintaining their essential humanity? Supreme Commander, she began carefully, the situation in the Sol system is complex. We have encountered the indigenous species, and they have developed significantly beyond our initial projections. On's compound eyes narrowed. Define significantly, Admiral. Before she could respond, her quarters were filled with a gentle presence that spoke without sound. May I assist you with this conversation, Admiral? The voice belonged to Gaia, the planetary consciousness of Earth itself. Over the past few days, had grown accustomed to the planet's gentle communications, though she still marveled at speaking directly with a world. Yes, she replied mentally, having learned that humans and their allies could communicate through direct thought transmission. I need to explain this situation to my superiors without triggering an immediate military response. Understanding is a gift that cannot be forced, only offered. Gaia responded with the patient wisdom of geological ages. But perhaps a demonstration would speak louder than words. The holographic transmission from On suddenly expanded, becoming 3-dimensional in a way that technology could never achieve. The Supreme Commander's image stepped out of the communication device and looked around's quarters with obvious confusion. What is this? On demanded, instinctively reaching for weapons that weren't there. Some form of matter transmission? Impossible. Actually, Supreme Commander, came Commander's voice as she materialized beside them. It's quite simple once you understand the relationship between consciousness and quantum mechanics. We've temporarily extended your awareness beyond the limitations of your physical form on Prime. On's exoskeleton went rigid with shock. His eyes darted between, and the impossible reality of standing in a room 6 months' journey from his actual body. You're experiencing quantum entanglement of consciousness, explained conversationally. Your mind is here, but your body remains safely in your command center. Don't worry, the effect is completely reversible and you'll suffer no ill effects. This is impossible, On whispered. No species has mastered consciousness transfer. The theoretical framework alone would require understanding consciousness as a fundamental force of the universe rather than an emergent property of biological complexity. Finished. Yes, that was a difficult conceptual leap for us as well. It took about 30,000 years to work out the basic principles. Watched her superior struggle with the implications of what he was experiencing. On was one of the most brilliant military minds in history, but even he was having difficulty processing the reality of human technological advancement. Admiral, On said slowly, report on the current tactical situation. Sir, the humans have capabilities that render our military technology obsolete, replied honestly. They could have destroyed our fleet the moment we entered their system. Instead, they've extended an invitation to join a galactic alliance based on cooperation rather than conquest. Impossible. No species achieves technological superiority without aggressive expansion. It contradicts every model of civilization development. Commander gestured, and suddenly they were no longer in quarters, but standing in the observation deck they had visited earlier. Earth spread out beneath them in all its transformed glory, while holographic displays showed the 43 species of the Galactic Cooperation Council working together across dozens of star systems. Supreme Commander, said gently, your models are based on scarcity thinking. When resources are limited, competition is indeed the optimal strategy. But once you solve the fundamental resource problem, cooperation becomes infinitely more powerful. What fundamental resource problem? On asked, though could see his tactical mind already working through the possibilities. Energy, Aura said as they appeared beside them. The transformed's presence caused On to recoil in shock. Everything your empire fights for, territory, materials, strategic positions, becomes irrelevant once you can tap directly into the quantum vacuum. Aura On whispered, but you died in the Outer Rim. The entire Fifth Fleet was lost. I was captured and brought here, Aura confirmed. I expected execution or imprisonment. Instead, I found a civilization that valued my contributions precisely because they were different from their own perspectives. On's mind was clearly racing. If energy scarcity is solved, if material limitations are overcome, then the economic basis for imperial expansion ceases to exist, confirmed, though it took us quite a while to realize this ourselves. For the first 100,000 years after achieving post-scarcity, humans still thought in terms of competition and territorial control. Old habits are difficult to break. Gaia's voice filled the space around them, speaking directly to On's mind. Young civilizations see the universe as a collection of things to be possessed. Mature civilizations see it as a network of relationships to be nurtured. On stumbled backward, his exoskeleton clattering against the observation deck railing. The planet itself is speaking to me. How is this possible? Consciousness is everywhere, Supreme Commander, explained. In quantum fluctuations, in stellar fusion processes, in the electromagnetic fields between galaxies. We simply learn to recognize it and establish communication protocols. The displays around them shifted to show the current borders of the Empire, along with detailed analyses of resource flows, population dynamics, and territorial pressures. On studied the data with growing comprehension. According to this analysis, he said slowly, our expansion rate is unsustainable. We're approaching civilizations with defensive capabilities that match our offensive ones. More than match them, Aura added quietly. The Commonwealth has energy weapons that can destabilize matter at the subatomic level. The Crystalline Alliance manipulates gravitational fields as easily as we manipulate electromagnetic ones, and the deep thinkers of the galactic core can rewrite the laws of physics in localized space, finished. Your empire is moving into regions where traditional military conquest is not just ineffective, it's suicidal. On absorbed this information with the strategic mind that had won him a dozen campaigns across the galaxy. What alternative do you propose? Join the Cooperation Council, said simply. Transform the Empire from a conquering force into a synthesizing one. Your species has an extraordinary gift for taking diverse cultures and finding ways to merge them harmoniously. Use that gift to build instead of to dominate. And what would that transformation involve? Gradual technological transfer, Aura explained. Educational exchanges, cultural integration programs, most importantly, a shift in perspective from scarcity thinking to abundance thinking. We would help you solve energy scarcity first, added. Once your civilization has access to unlimited power, the economic pressures that drive expansion disappear. Then we work on consciousness development, dimensional engineering, and collaborative governance. On was quiet for several minutes, processing implications that would reshape everything the Empire understood about itself. Finally, he spoke. What about the species we've already conquered? What happens to them in this new arrangement? They get to choose, replied. Some might choose independence, others might choose to remain affiliated with in a new voluntary alliance. All would benefit from access to council technologies and knowledge. And if they choose to leave the Empire entirely, then they leave with our blessing and assistance in establishing themselves as independent members of the galactic community, Ara said. True strength doesn't require holding on to what doesn't want to be held. On looked around at the impossible reality he was experiencing, standing on an alien world while his body remained on Prime, speaking with beings who casually manipulated forces that science barely understood, seeing evidence of a galactic civilization based on principles that contradicted everything he had learned about survival. This offer, he said carefully, it comes with conditions, I assume. Only one, replied. No further military expansion while the transformation process occurs. The 3 worlds your empire was planning to target are off-limits. In exchange, we provide immediate access to energy technologies that will eliminate resource scarcity throughout space. How long would this transformation take? For your species, perhaps 1,000 years for full integration, estimated. Though you'd begin seeing benefits immediately, unlimited energy alone would revolutionize civilization within a generation. On turn 2, Admiral, your assessment of this proposal. Chose her words carefully, knowing that the future of 800 billion lives might depend on them. Sir, in my professional opinion, we have encountered a form of civilization so advanced that resistance would be futile and cooperation would be transformative. The humans and their allies aren't offering us subjugation, they're offering us evolution. And if the High Command rejects this offer? The observation deck fell silent, finally spoke with infinite gentleness. Then you continue on your current path until you encounter someone less patient than we are. The galaxy is vast, Supreme Commander. Not everyone believes in the value of choice. But, Gaia's voice added, carrying the weight of geological ages, the offer will remain open for as long as your species exists. Growth cannot be forced, but it can always be chosen. On straightened into the formal posture of military decision-making. I will need to consult with the full High Command. This decision affects every citizen of the Empire. Of course, nodded. Take whatever time you need, but remember that while you deliberate, the galaxy continues to evolve. The window for peaceful transformation won't remain open indefinitely. One final question, On said. Why do this? Why offer transformation to a species that represents everything you've moved beyond? Smile contained the accumulated wisdom of 500,000 years. Because, Supreme Commander, we remember what it was like to be young and afraid and convinced that the universe was a competition. Someone helped us learn better. Now it's our turn to help. The quantum entanglement began to fade, and On's consciousness started withdrawing to his physical form on Prime. His last words before the connection severed were barely audible. Admiral, maintain position in the Sol system. Do not attempt to leave until you receive further orders. And Admiral. Yes, sir. Prepare a complete report on everything you've learned here. Everything. The High Command needs to understand what we're really dealing with. As presence faded entirely, found herself alone with and Aura on the observation deck overlooking Earth. The weight of what had just occurred settled over her like a physical force. Do you think they'll choose transformation? Asked. I don't know, admitted. The High Command has never encountered a situation like this. Our entire civilization is built around the assumption that growth requires conquest. Then perhaps, Aura suggested, it's time to help them discover what growth really means. 6 months later, Admiral watched through her quarters viewing portal as the largest fleet in history emerged from hyperspace around Earth. 250 warships, representing the combined might of the Empire's most advanced battle groups. At their head flew the massive dreadnought Imperial Destiny, bristling with weapons that could crack planets and carrying the full high command of the Empire. Yet as the fleet took position around Earth, not a single human defensive system activated. No weapons locked onto the ships. No shields powered up to repel potential attacks. Earth simply continued its peaceful rotation, as though the arrival of the galaxy's most feared military force was no more significant than the rising of its sun. "Admiral," came Supreme Commander On's voice through her communication system, "you will escort a high command delegation to meet with the human leadership. Full diplomatic protocols are in effect." "Understood, sir," replied, though she knew that human civilization had moved far beyond the need for traditional diplomatic ceremonies. Still, she appreciated that her superiors were at least attempting peaceful contact rather than immediate conquest. An hour later, she stood in the same living amphitheater where she had first experienced direct consciousness sharing, this time accompanying 12 of the highest-ranking members of civilization. Each was a legend in their own right: military commanders who had conquered star systems, scientists who had unlocked the secrets of hyperspace travel, philosophers who had shaped imperial doctrine for. Commander appeared before them in her characteristic unassuming manner, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she was facing beings who collectively controlled the fate of hundreds of worlds. "Welcome to Earth," she said simply. "I trust your journey was comfortable." Supreme Commander On stepped forward, his formal diplomatic bearing rigid with barely controlled tension. "Commander, I am here to discuss terms for the Empire's potential participation in your Galactic Cooperation Council." "There are no terms," replied gently. "Only choices, but please let me show you what those choices might lead to." The amphitheater transformed around them, and suddenly the delegation found themselves standing in space itself, watching the galaxy spin slowly before them. But this wasn't the galaxy they knew. This was a projection of what it could become. Thousands of star systems glowed with the gentle light of cooperative civilizations. Trade routes connected worlds not for resource extraction, but for the sharing of knowledge and consciousness. Vast engineering projects spanned entire solar systems, not weapons or fortifications, but gardens and libraries and laboratories where different species worked together to understand the deepest mysteries of existence. "This is the galaxy 30,000 years from now," Gaia's voice explained, speaking directly to their minds. "If current trends continue, if wisdom spreads faster than fear, if cooperation grows stronger than competition." Military Commander Aura, veteran of 50 campaigns, stared at the projection with obvious skepticism. "Beautiful fantasy, but how do you maintain order across such vast distances? How do you prevent conflicts between species with incompatible needs?" "Come and see," said. Reality shifted again, and they were standing on what appeared to be a space station, though it was unlike anything in engineering databases. The structure seemed to be growing rather than constructed, its walls breathing gently as they regulated internal atmosphere and generated their own gravity fields. "This is Haven Station," explained as they walked through corridors that adjusted their lighting and temperature to accommodate each species' needs automatically. One of 17,000 diplomatic facilities throughout the galaxy. When conflicts arise between member species, they're resolved through direct consciousness sharing rather than force. They entered a vast chamber where representatives of a dozen different species were engaged in what looked like collective meditation. Their thoughts were visible as patterns of light that flowed between them, weaving complex tapestries of meaning and understanding. "The and the L have been in territorial dispute for the past century," narrated as they watched. "Both species need the same type of mineral-rich worlds for their reproductive cycles. Traditional diplomacy would involve negotiation, compromise, enforcement mechanisms, all of which require someone to give up something they need. Instead," Aura added, appearing beside them, "they're sharing direct experience of their respective needs. They are experiencing what it feels like to be unable to reproduce without specific mineral environments. The L are feeling the claustrophobic panic that experience in confined spaces." As they watched, the patterns of light began to merge and transform. New configurations emerged that hadn't existed in either species' original thinking. "They're discovering solutions that neither species could have imagined alone," observed. "Collaborative terraforming techniques that can create worlds suitable for both species. Shared settlements that provide both the open spaces need and the mineral-rich environments L require." Chief Scientist, who had accompanied the delegation, was studying the process with intense fascination. "This is collective problem-solving on a scale we've never imagined. But surely there must be conflicts that can't be resolved through sharing consciousness, fundamental incompatibilities." "Of course," acknowledged. "Some differences can't be bridged, Some species require mutually exclusive environments or have genuinely irreconcilable values. In those cases, the galaxy is large enough for separation. And if one species attempts to force its will on another, then the other 42 species of the Council respond, came a new voice. They turned to see a being that every category had for intelligent life. It was simultaneously crystalline and organic, energy and matter, individual and collective. When it spoke, reality itself seemed to adjust to accommodate its presence. "I am the adjudicator," it said, its voice resonating through dimensions senses couldn't fully perceive. "I was created through the collaborative consciousness of all Council species when our first major crisis arose. I exist to resolve conflicts that cannot be settled through normal diplomatic means." "What kind of conflicts?" On asked. 3,000 years ago, a species called the developed technology that could drain life energy from entire star systems, the adjudicator explained. They saw the universe as a resource to be consumed rather than a garden to be tended. They refused all offers of cooperation and began systematically destroying worlds. What happened to them? They were given every opportunity to change their path. When they refused, the Council acted collectively to prevent further destruction. They were not destroyed. Their consciousness was preserved and integrated into the galactic community, but their destructive capabilities were removed. Military Commander Ara stepped forward aggressively. "You conquered them. You're describing forced absorption, exactly what you claim to oppose." "No," the adjudicator replied patiently. "We prevented them from committing genocide while preserving their essential nature. They continue to exist, to grow, to contribute to galactic civilization. They simply do so in ways that don't require the extinction of other species." The implications of this exchange were not lost on the delegation. They were facing beings who could casually prevent entire civilizations from destructive expansion while maintaining those civilizations' fundamental rights to exist and grow. "Is that a threat?" On asked bluntly. "It's a promise," replied. "Not to you specifically, but to all sentient life in the galaxy. Destructive expansion has consequences, always, but the choice of how to respond to those consequences remains open." "Show them the alternative," Ara suggested quietly. The space around them transformed once more, and suddenly they were standing on what was unmistakably a world, but one transformed beyond recognition. The familiar architecture remained, but it had been enhanced with the organic technologies they had seen on Earth. Citizens moved through cities that breathed and grew, their own exoskeletons enhanced with crystalline patterns that spoke of integration with consciousness-expanding technologies. "This is Prime, 30 years after joining the Council," explained. "Your species' gift for synthesis has made them among our most valued contributors. Facilitators now help dozens of species learn to merge their cultures harmoniously." They watched children playing games that involved manipulating quantum fields with their thoughts. Scientists working alongside crystalline beings and energy creatures to unlock the secrets of multidimensional engineering. Philosophers sharing consciousness with ancient AIs to explore questions that spanned millions of years. "They look happy," Chief Scientist observed with obvious surprise. "Why wouldn't they be?" Ara asked. "They're doing what I've always done, bringing diverse elements together into something greater. The only difference is that now they do it through invitation rather than conquest." "What about the species we've already conquered?" asked Industrial Coordinator. "Those under Imperial rule." Watch said. The scene shifted to show dozens of worlds that had once been conquests. On each one, former subject species were being offered a choice: independence with Council support, voluntary association with a transformed confederation, or full membership in the galactic community. Most surprisingly, the majority were choosing to maintain their connections to but in new configurations based on mutual benefit rather than domination. "It turns out," Ara observed, "that most of our subject species actually value what civilization brought them. They just want to be partners rather than subjects." Supreme Commander On watched these scenes with the expression of a being whose fundamental assumptions about the universe were being systematically dismantled and rebuilt. The economic implications alone. If every species has access to unlimited energy, unlimited resources, unlimited time, traditional economics becomes meaningless. "Exactly," agreed. Which is why joining the Council isn't just about gaining access to new technologies. It's about transforming your entire civilization's relationship with existence itself. But transformation takes time, the adjudicator added. And during that time, old patterns of thinking can create problems, which is why Council membership includes support structures, mentoring species who help guide the transition. Who would mentor us? On asked. The replied. They went through a similar transformation 12,000 years ago. They were the galaxy's most feared conquerors before they learned cooperation. Now they're among our most effective peacekeepers and cultural facilitators. A new being appeared before them, tall, elegant, with skin that shifted colors to reflect emotional states. When they spoke, their voice carried harmonics that immediately put the delegation at ease. The transition is difficult, the representative said honestly. Every conquest species struggles with the shift from scarcity thinking to abundance thinking, but the rewards are beyond anything you can imagine while trapped in competitive paradigms. What specific support would be provided? Industrial coordinator asked. Immediate energy technology transfer to eliminate resource pressures, they explained. Cultural exchange programs to help your population adapt to new possibilities. Scientific collaboration to accelerate your technological development. And gradual consciousness expansion training to help your species access the collective wisdom of the galaxy. And the timeline. As fast or as slow as your species chooses, replied. Some civilizations complete the transition in a few centuries, others take. The important thing is that the process is voluntary and guided by your own cultural values. Chief Scientist was practically vibrating with excitement. The research opportunities alone. Access to technologies that manipulate consciousness itself, dimensional engineering, quantum-scale manufacturing. Don't forget the practical benefits, Ara added. Unlimited, perfect health, the ability to explore any form of consciousness you can imagine. Most who join the Council eventually choose to experience existence from the perspective of other species. It's enlightening. Supreme Commander On was quiet for several minutes, processing everything he had seen and learned. Finally, he spoke. The full High Command will need to vote on this proposal. It represents a fundamental change in everything the Empire has stood for across its entire history. Of course, nodded. But remember, this isn't an ultimatum with a deadline. The offer remains open for as long as your species exists. The only constraint is that continued aggressive expansion cannot be permitted. And if we choose to refuse, then you continue on your current path until the consequences become unavoidable, the adjudicator replied. But those consequences are not punishment, they're natural results of choices made. The universe tends toward cooperation over competition in the long term. Species that insist on competitive paradigms eventually encounter forces that competition cannot overcome. The delegation was transported back to their ships, their minds filled with visions of transformation that challenged everything they had believed about survival, strength, and success. As Admiral watched the fleet prepare for the journey back to space, she found herself hoping that wisdom would triumph over fear in the deliberations to come. She had seen the future that awaited her species if they could find the courage to choose growth over conquest, cooperation over domination, abundance over scarcity. The question now was whether 800 billion citizens were ready to discover what they could become when they stopped fighting the universe and started dancing with it. 3 months later, as the fleet reached the edge of the Sol system, Admiral received the transmission she had been waiting for. Supreme Commander On's image appeared in her quarters, but this time his expression carried something she had never seen before. Hope. Admiral, he said formally, you are hereby ordered to return to Earth and inform Commander that the Empire accepts the invitation to join the Galactic Cooperation Council. Tell them we are ready to learn what we can become. Behind him, through the command center's viewing portal, could see Prime beginning to change. New construction was already, not fortifications or weapon factories, but research centers and cultural exchange facilities. Her people were preparing to become something they had never been before, partners in the galaxy's greatest experiment in conscious evolution. As she set course for Earth, reflected on the strange turns that history could take. 500,000 years ago, they had dismissed humanity as a primitive species doomed to extinction. Now those same humans were offering to guide the Empire toward a form of civilization beyond their most ambitious dreams. Perhaps, she thought, that was the most human thing of all, the capacity to help former enemies become friends, to transform competitors into collaborators, to see potential for growth in even the most aggressive conquerors. It was, she realized, a very good way to inherit the galaxy. Below them, Earth continued its patient rotation, carrying 10 billion human minds and countless other forms of consciousness in perfect harmony, waiting to see what choice an ancient empire would make when confronted with the possibility of becoming something greater than it had ever imagined. Not whether your species is strong enough to survive, but whether it is wise enough to thrive. Raise another way. Show us, whispered. Don't worry, added cheerfully. Earth is lovely this time of year. We've made some improvements since your last visit. I think you'll find the changes illuminating.